Food waste is one of the biggest issues affecting the way we make food. Whether it's through agriculture or producing meat, every production process has its inefficiencies, and you're bound to end up with some waste. In this video, though, we're going to talk about the staggering scale at which food is wasted before it even makes it to store shelves, and then we'll look into ways to combat the problem. Starting off with a shocking revelation: 15%. That's the amount of food produced worldwide that is lost before it even leaves the farms. That was the finding of a report by the World Wildlife Fund in 2021. And if you want to put a number to that food loss, it's 1.2 billion tons. It's honestly crazy to think so much food can flat out go to waste when billions of people around the world don't have enough food to eat. The objective of the report was to help governments tailor their policies toward ending waste. And the farms aren't the only places where food is wasted. If you also account for wastage elsewhere in the process, we're looking at an eye-watering 40% of food never making it to a dinner table, or any table at all, really. These numbers may also come as a shock, as previous estimates, which only looked into post-farming waste, were missing out on a big chunk of the problem. Thanks to the WWF for providing us with a more clear picture of the true extent of our food waste problem. One of the report's findings is that, because of the underestimation of food wastage at the farm, a lot of the policies that aim to tackle food waste focus on areas like the retail business or supply chain management. Sure, those areas have problems too, but if a solid 15% of food waste is happening at the production level, then that isn't something we can ignore. Moving on to where we think the wastage is happening. We often make the assumption that if there is food wastage happening on farms, the problem would probably be worse in lower income areas. No shade on those regions, but with limited access to advanced technologies and modern farming techniques, those farmers would be missing out on the gains in efficiency. Well, we were wrong. It turns out that 58% of farm stage food loss happens in the mid to high income parts of the world. So over half. Is that a sign we need to go back to the old ways of farming? No, the problem is actually kind of the opposite. Because technology has made farming faster and more efficient, farms are producing more food than they can actually sell or consume. Since agricultural products are perishable, anything that can't be sold or eaten goes to waste. This is important because there are programs out there that aim to provide training and advanced technology to farmers in lower income areas. This would, apparently, help them reduce their food waste. That's not a bad thing, but we're obviously completely ignoring the other side of the equation. You know, the side that's technically wasting more food. With everything you've just seen and heard in mind, this video is going to talk about some ways that we think world governments can consider reining in food waste by redirecting it to the people who need it or just preventing wastage. Let's consider some ways to actually lower food wastage at farms. We'll start at the easiest place: the overproduction of food in the more technologically advanced farms. Your first thought might be to push those farmers to reduce their output so that less goes to waste. But is that really the right approach? We only consider this as an overproduction problem because the farmers are unable to sell or consume all the food they generate. It doesn't mean there aren't people out there who'd be happy to eat that food. In fact, if you could actually get the food to every single household that needs it, there would be no waste at the current production levels. While supply chains exist to take food from farms to stores, there are millions of people in every country who can't afford to buy food from the store. Governments should consider ways in which food can be reliably transported to food banks, homeless shelters, orphanages, and so on. And naturally, there needs to be an incentive for the farmers to let their food go to these kinds of places, either through subsidies or tax breaks. Since we're on the topic of food wastage right now, this process should be efficient enough that food can be relatively fresh by the time it reaches these vendors. It's an expense for the government, but then so are prevailing issues of food insecurity and poverty. Overall, it's just the right thing to do. Step on it, world leaders. Next, could it help to add even more tech to farms? Not in terms of devices, although those could be useful. As we'll explain, we're talking about the big D of the 21st century: data. A lot of farming in the modern day is done with hand-me-down wisdom and the judgment of the farmers, which can be good enough a lot of the time, but it isn't exactly accurate. These things can be wrong, and this can lead to crop failures and wastage. Farmers can instead be trained to use all kinds of climate, seed, and soil data in order to optimize their farming techniques and the number of crops they plant. This will become especially relevant as the years go by, since the human race isn't planning to slow down climate change anytime soon. With droughts and storms getting more extreme and unpredictable, working around them using stats and data is more important than ever. There's a reason why data is the name of the game in every industry these days. Apart from the training the farmers would need, there isn't too much of a capital investment required to put this plan in motion. You can get a lot of weather data from the local news or the internet, but if you need anything more sophisticated than that, measurement and testing devices are relatively cheap. For a relatively slight investment, the performance of farms could be improved quite a bit, which makes this really worth considering. One other thing to address is our food quality standards. This applies more to the more privileged parts of the world, and it inarguably contributes to that 58% of wasted food. Because we have the privilege of having high standards about what food we buy, we definitely tend to inspect and reject things at the store. Those standards are also coded into governmental policies. Agencies will set quality levels for the kinds of produce a farmer might try to sell, and the allowable price tag depends on which quality the product falls into. But depending on how these quality levels are defined, a farmer could be forced to underprice their food so much that it just isn't worth the effort to sell them. How do farmers deal with this? They simply discard any products that they can tell will not fetch a good price on the market. In many cases, the farms themselves might not even consume the product that gets discarded in this way, which is just a complete loss. Again, in a world where so many families are starving, it's really unfair to throw away food because it doesn't look right. The solutions here are threefold. For starters, we need to bring our standards down a fair bit. Secondly, governments need to adjust their food quality levels. And finally, farmers need a way to sell their output that wouldn't pass with retail customers. Some of the solutions we talked about in the last segment could help here too. Finally, even after all this, some amount of waste is inevitable. One useful line of thinking could be ways to recycle wasted food. Basically, stuff is only waste if it's of no use. So let's try to come up with ways to use up the food that, for whatever reason, can't be sold or consumed. An easy way of doing this would be to use the wasted food as feed or compost. That's probably something farmers have been doing all along, really. But how about we convert food to biomass? This biomass can be used to fuel equipment, or it could be sold off for whatever it's worth. It'll solve two problems at once: less food waste and less reliance on fossil fuels like diesel and coal. The big downside here is that this is expensive to get into, and you might be out of the reach of many farmers. Basically, in order to convert food into biomass, you need a very pleasantly named piece of equipment called a digester. You feed your organic waste into this machine, and it gives you biomass. These digesters are really expensive, so how can this be made accessible to farmers at large? Biomass conversion facilities are slowly popping up. You don't need a digester, just drop your waste off at the local bioenergy facility. One such place is the Coal Bioenergy Facility in Roswell, and more are soon to follow. The downside to this is that the farms don't get to keep the biomass. That's it for today's video. Let us know your suggestions for cutting food waste in the comments section down below. But whatever you do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.